I'm going to talk about perhaps the most difficult thing in Czech now for Western minds or English minds to get their brain around, and that's verbal aspect. By far the most difficult thing, and people give up on Czech and Russian and so on because they say they just can never understand this. Well, let's have a look at something. In English, I am reading. I read the letter today. I read the Bible today. No, I am reading. Okay, you're continuing to read, but I read the letter today. Did you finish it? Well, I suppose so. I suppose I finished it. But I read the Bible today. Well, did you finish reading the whole Bible? Ooh, doubt it. You have to be a fast reader for that. I wrote a letter. Okay, did you finish it? Maybe. I was writing a letter. Whoops, sorry, it smudged a bit there. That should say letter. I was writing a letter. Did you finish it? Maybe. I will cook dinner. Tomorrow? Well, that means you're going to cook it just once, I guess. But I will cook dinner next month. Well, will you be cooking it just once next month or every day? So here we're talking about the present, the past, and the future, which English is very good at. But to express, so this is called tense, the past, present, and future. But English isn't quite so good at expressing what in linguistics is called aspect, and that means the completedness of something. We don't know whether you're going to finish these things, do them once or not, or keep going on. Now, other languages have this much more explicitly concept of aspect, and it differs from language to language. I'm going to talk about aspect in Slavic languages. And it's extremely complicated subject. There are whole books written on this, whole books. So I've only got another 9 minutes. Don't expect too much from me. Verbal aspect is usually talked about as perfective versus imperfective. And the idea is that you typically get in Slavic languages an aspectual pair, two verbs instead of one. Instead of having the verb read in to read in English, in Czech we have číst and přečíst. In Czech, it's got these two verbs. And the difference, why are they called this, by the way? People think that perfective means that something's the best it could possibly be, and imperfective means there's something wrong with it. Nothing to do with that, actually. It comes from the Latin perfectus, which means completed. So you have to focus, according to the textbooks, on whether something is completed or not to decide whether to use přečíst or číst. Now, my silly brain thought, well, something can only be completed if it's in the past. So that must mean that we have to use the perfective one for the past and the imperfective one for the present and the future because it's not completed yet. Well, it turns out that's not true. It's much more complicated than that. So, the aspectual pairs. To read, we have the imperfective, which relates somehow to not completed, which is číst, and the perfective přečíst, for cook, vařit, uvařit. Nést, to carry, donést, for the perfective. Which one do I use when? It doesn't really seem to relate only to the past tense. Well, in the books, they say you use the imperfective for something which is continual and ongoing, and or which is habitual. So, for example, I am swimming. That's continual. Last year, I swam. We presume that it means you went many times, so it's habitual. And completed is something that you do one time until it's finished. So, I wrote a letter. Well, you finished writing it, I suppose. But my brain could never understand what these dots and lines really meant in practice. It was just very theoretical to me. In particular, it turns out that in the past tense, you can use continual, habitual, and single event, completed, because you can say, I was swimming last year many times. I was swimming last year, many times. Or last year I swam. That presumes you just did it once. But when did you just swam and swam and swam. Or I read a letter. You just did it one time to completion. In the present tense, you can only use continuous because you're in the middle of doing something. We don't know when it'll end. And in the future, they say you can use all three. So next year I will be swimming. Is that is it a long continuous event, or is it habitual? Does it mean you're going to swim many times? Or next year I will write a letter. Next year I will be writing letters. I just couldn't understand actually what in practice these lines and dots actually meant, other than in a very fluffy sense. And that's because the textbooks, oh, where's my focus? The textbooks focused on this idea of completeness because of the Latin root, I suppose, and they'd say you have to worry about whether something is completed or progressive, ongoing. Well, that was no good to me because I could never quite grasp the difference. And that's because I don't think that's what the difference is, at least for my humble brain. I eventually clicked when I stopped thinking about the textbook definition and decided for myself it's actually about finished versus stopped. Completedness, something can be completed in two ways. I finished it now, so I wrote a letter and I got to the end, that's the end of the letter, so I finished it. Or I stopped. I was writing a letter and my wife said, hurry up, we've got to go to the restaurant. Yesterday I was reading a book, but then I fell asleep, so I didn't finish reading it, but I stopped reading it. Or yesterday I was reading the newspaper, I got to the end and then put the newspaper down, well, I finished. You see? So tomorrow I will cook dinner. Well, I'll cook it and then finish cooking it. So that would be finished. Or next month I will cook dinner. Well, if we're talking about doing it many times, I'll keep cooking and then just stop cooking after I've cooked for many, many occasions. So finished versus stopped, that's the way I see it. And so imperfective is related to stopped, at least in my brain, and perfective is related to finished. And it takes a while to get the distinction in your head about why did something terminate or why will something terminate? Well, because I've finished doing it, there's no more to do, or, well, I just stopped doing it. So ceased is to read when you stopped. So I was reading the Bible last night. You would use ceased because you didn't read the whole thing, but I read a letter last night, przeciist, because you finished reading it. Varzit, to cook. You use this just when you stop doing something. So I will cook dinner next year. You'll cook it many, many times, then you'll stop cooking. Yeah, so that's one reason to complete. Well, I just stop doing it. But uvarzit, I will cook dinner tomorrow. So you'll cook dinner and then you'll finish cooking it. You know, the dinner's ready. So this finishes versus stopped gets your head, I think, if you think about things in English this way first, am I going to finish this or just going to stop it? It really helps you decide. Stopped means imperfective, finished is perfective. And it now made me understand why, in some cases, the textbook actually had two definitions. So nest is the imperfective. It's the imperfective and it means to carry. But donest means to bring. But these are shown as an aspectual pair. And I thought, why have they got a different definition? Well, the reason is you can be carrying something and then you just stop carrying it. But if you're carrying somewhere to something, you're bringing it. Yes? So you finish bringing it, the activity there, because you finished carrying it, you brought the item, so you would say donest. It's finished, it's done. And then you start to understand when you think of it this way that some verbs don't have a perfective. They only have the imperfective. For example, my wife is snoring. Well, I'll shake her and she'll stop snoring. But you can't, or last week she snored. Well, did she finish snoring? Well, no, because she never actually decided, okay, I'm done snoring, I'm happy now. Instead, she turned over or I shook her, or she just woke up and so she just stopped snoring. You see the difference? And so, this is it. In short, the way I see as a good start to understand perfective and imperfective is imperfective relates to when something is going to be or has or will be stopped, and Perfective is when it's actually finished. And once you understand the difference between these two, you'll understand the difference between these two, at least at a high level. It's a good start. It'll stop you from giving up, and then for the actual details, you will have to hit the textbooks. But I hope that gives you a good understanding, a good introduction to what aspect is about, at least the way I see it.